Hi class. Today we're actually going to be using some new technology, and what it's going to do is we're going to be able to follow along with the PowerPoint while I narrate it. These should only take just a few minutes. We don't really want to go too long because I understand that there's a tendency maybe to zone out, but I think this would be helpful in pulling out some important parts of the book. As you do your reading and look at the PowerPoint, you'll be able to contextualize some of the concepts that we're going to be covering in the chapters, this chapter, chapter number 2, as well as the chapters to come. So in chapter number 2, we're talking about understanding yourself. And what's important to know is that how you see yourself, how you view yourself, is central to interacting with others, especially in a communicative process. Let's look at the definition of your self-concept. So self-concept is the sum total of beliefs you hold about yourself. And when we look at self-concept, there's 4 pillars of self-concept, as you'll see coming up on the screen right now. And the 4 pillars of self-concept is social comparison, social judgments, self-observation, and self-identification. So you have that right now on this screen, but what we're going to do is we're going to transition to the next slide, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail about exactly what those 4 pillars of self-concept are. So let's move in. So we have sources of self-concept, and we already said that it's social comparison. But what is it exactly? Social comparison is judging yourself in comparison to others in your reference groups. Now those reference groups can be different things. For example, it could be maybe you're a single dad or a single mom. Maybe you are in college. Maybe you work at a bank. And so working at a bank, you're going to compare yourself to other people who work at a bank. Maybe as a student who might be going back to school after some time that had established a family, maybe you're going to compare yourself to other people in the same situation as you and monitor how well you're doing relative to the people in your reference groups. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It's just something that you have to be aware of that you do. We all do it. So the next source of self-concept is social judgment. And that's reflections of others' reactions to you, either verbally or non-verbally. Believe it or not, we're actually shaped by other people's reactions to us. That's how we develop a self-conscious. When we're little kids, our parents set boundaries for us, and those boundaries allow us to know what's right and what's wrong. And I don't know about you, but when I was a child, my mom always had the look. Maybe you're familiar with it. The look meaning that you're doing something wrong and you can just look at your parents and realize that you need to stop doing it or there's going to be some consequences that you don't like, right? And that governs your behavior. It's a form of social judgment. What you do is you reflect and say, wow, I can tell that my parents not pleased by this, either verbally or non-verbally. Maybe it's just, like I said, the look. And then you're able to change or alter your behavior based off of that social judgment. So that's just a quick example of that. Self-observation describes the process of interpreting your actual performance, your looks, proficiencies. So sometimes we do things, and if we feel that we're good at it or we take to it or people compliment us on it, we're more likely to continue on to do it, and we take that into like, this is who I am, right? And then there are some people who do some things, maybe set out to do some activities, and they're not very good at it, so they just stop. I think we can all find times in our life where we set out to do something, and we weren't very good at it. It just wasn't something we felt comfortable with or confident with, and we didn't receive positive feedback on it, so we kind of just stopped. For me, I'm not a good dancer, okay? And so I don't really dance in front of people all that much because I never really got good feedback on it, and I'm not that good at it. At least I don't feel I am. There are other times, though, in this process that we do engage in self-observation, and even though we're bad at something, we stick with it long enough to improve upon it. So just because we may not be proficient in an area doesn't mean that we will necessarily quit, although it is not uncommon for people to give up something if they're not proficient at it. Self-identification. So self-identification deals with how your cultural affiliations and various roles and experience make up who you are. Okay, so think about it for a second. Who are you? Do you consider yourself to be African American, Hispanic, white, German, Muslim, Christian? How you see yourself has everything to do with how you interact with other people. How you see yourself also has everything to do with how you communicate. Okay? So if in your culture you behave a certain way, or you're informed that your culture does this, or your culture behaves like that, then that's going to dictate to a large degree how you interact with other people based off of how you see your own culture and how you participate with other people. Also various roles, right? So that has a lot to do with it too. So various roles. Are you a single dad? Are you a mom? Are you a father? Are you a daughter? Are you an ex-Marine? Are you a veteran of any armed forces? Are you a police officer? Are you clergy? Your role in your family, your role at your job, and your role in the community, all these things inform us of how we should respond and react and interact in communication interactions with others. So that's important to keep in mind as well. So let's go ahead and move forward. Self-perception. You'll see in the screen I have a picture in the left-hand corner of, I think his name is Neve. He's the host of the show Catfish on MTV. Some of you guys may have seen that show. I enjoy watching it. If you haven't seen the show yet, it's about people who create these personas online, and they end up interacting with people based on these personas, and typically they're fabricated. And so what happens is, let's say somebody falls in love with somebody over on Facebook that creates this profile, but there's always some issue where they don't want to come out and meet the person that they've been talking to. And so Neve helps these people find out who they've been interacting with through social media on the other end. And typically, always in an episode, it's never really the person that they thought that they were interacting with. The person will steal pictures or do all these kind of crazy things. So it's a really interesting show. The reason why I show the picture is because this slide is really talking about examining self-presentation. So when you look at the show Catfish, you see these extreme cases of people presenting themselves in social media as something different than what they are in real life. Okay? And I think maybe not that extreme as what we see on Catfish, but I think we can all agree that in social media we've come across people who have completely changed or distorted or altered their image and presented themselves as a different way through social media than they do in real life. And that's not uncommon, especially in social media. But let's just put social media aside and actually look at just regular face-to-face interactions. I think we still do, to some extent, alter our self-presentation depending on the group that we're in. Think about it on your own then. How you interact with a group of friends might be different than how you interact with the people at your job. How you interact with the people at your job on your level of employment might be different than how you interact with the boss or the president of the company. How you interact with your family might be different than how you interact with clergy. I think what we do is we, on a subconscious level, present some different aspect of ourselves depending on who we're interacting with. And it's not wrong to do it. It doesn't make you disingenuous. It's just important to be aware of it. So self-presentation is strategies used to shape and control the way we are seen by other people. There's self-monitoring, which is the ability to observe and control how you interact with others, and verbally and non-verbally. And they break it down into a couple of interesting points of self-monitoring, which is high self-monitors and low self-monitors. And that's on page 28, but here's a quick synopsis. So high self-monitors, maybe you're one of these people, okay? Or you know somebody like that who's a high self-monitor. And high self-monitors are people who actually filter what their thoughts before they come out of their mouth. So they think something, but they really consider it and weigh it before they actually speak it. Those are high self-monitors. And then on the opposite end are low self-monitors. And low self-monitors are people who don't really filter what they say. Maybe you know people like that. What they say and what they think in their mind comes directly out of their mouth, and it's not guarded. Okay, and those are low self monitors. So I think each one has a positive and negative to it. I don't think there's one that's better than the other. But read about it and think about it in terms of who you are as an individual and how you present yourself. Which category fits you the best? And that leads to impression management, which is the process of influencing the image people have of you. Okay, and there's 5 impression management strategies that are listed on page 29, so make sure you check that out. Now we're going to talk about classification schemes. And one thing that's important to say, or not to say, but one thing that's important to understand, excuse me, is that we talk a lot in society about stereotypes, right? And it can lead to talks about racism, prejudice, and although racism and prejudice are things that are bad, stereotyping is a form of classification. And what I want you to come to an understanding with in this class is that we all do it. So I don't want to demonize classification or sometimes stereotyping. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It's actually how we learn. We learn things by categorizing them. The mind learns by putting things in certain places. What's important is not to demonize the fact that we do it. What's important is the fact that we understand that we do it. And this has everything to do with how we perceive other people, how we view other people. Okay, now the first half of the slides we were talking about how we present ourselves. Now we're transitioning into the way we actually perceive other people. And we do that by putting things in categories. And we do that through a selection process. So let's talk about selection. Selection is the process of selecting certain stimuli. And you probably sit there and say, well, Chris, what is stimuli? Glad you asked. Stimuli is something we sense that attracts our attention. So we put something, we see things that catch our attention, right? It could be a person that you think is very attractive. They're just, whatever you think beautiful is, they're beautiful. And so you're attracted to a certain stimuli. Let's say blue eyes just is what attracts you. You just find it very attractive. So you're looking at stimuli, which is the blue eyes, and it's catching your attention. And you can say blue-eyed people are beautiful. Blue-eyed people are talented. Blue-eyed people are nice. Blue-eyed people are friendly. So with the stimuli that you're seeing, which is blue eyes, you're attributing all these characteristics that may or may not be there, but your eyes are focused on it. So let's look at how once we see stimuli, let's see how we organize it. So there's 4 constructs in which we organize stimuli. So when we see things, we kind of put it in these boxes, and it helps us make sense of what we're seeing. So there's physical constructs which emphasizes people's physical appearance, both subjective and objective. So if somebody's attractive, we kind of put them in a construct and say, oh, that's a pretty person. They're like this. There's role constructs, which emphasizes people's professional or social roles. There's interaction constructs, which emphasizes people's behavior. And lastly, there's psychological construct, which emphasizes people's thoughts and feelings. And then the last part is there's interpretation, which is the process of assigning meaning to the selected stimuli. So if we see somebody who is attractive, we are going to assign meaning to that, right? There's a study I'm going to show you, not in this chapter, but the next chapter. And we're going to look closer into what attractiveness means. We assign meaning to attractiveness. When we find somebody to be attractive, they're not just communicating that they're beautiful. They're communicating a lot more. They're communicating that they're healthy, that they're smart, that they're capable. Even if those things aren't necessarily present, attractiveness is a stimuli that we pull meaning from behind the surface. Think about it in your own life. We've probably either done it before or known somebody who's dated a person who's very attracted to them, but that attractiveness is a stimuli that's causing them to not look at the fact that the person isn't a good person. Maybe they don't have a good job. Maybe they lie a lot. Maybe they're not faithful. But just the fact that they look pretty is enough to make them look past the other things that would be apparent if they weren't so attractive. In fact, a lot of studies show that people who are more attractive actually are able to get better jobs and higher paying jobs than people who are judged as less attractive. And that's on account of stimuli. And not only stimuli, but how we interpret stimuli. All right, let's go into a little bit more and talk about perception. So perception is the process in which you select, organize, and interpret stimuli. So there's 4 ways we do it. There's selective exposure, selective attention, and selective interpretation, and selective recall. So selective exposure is exposing ourselves to messages that align with our pre-established belief system. So if you're a very conservative type of person, politically conservative, and you only watch Fox News, which is a conservative news outlet, then you're probably engaging in selective exposure. On the contrary, if you're a very liberal person, politically liberal, and you watch MSNBC, which is a very liberal news outlet, then chances are you're engaging as well in selective exposure, because what you're doing is you're attending to the news outlets that support your political positions. Then there's selective attention, which is paying attention to the messages that we already believe. All right? And then there's also selective interpretation, which is altering the meaning so that they become consistent with what we already believe. So there's people who kind of massage the meaning of messages so that they can fall into line with where they're at. And then there's selective recall, which is remembering the positive or negative messages that support your belief system. So these are things that we do based on our perception, okay? And we all carry perceptions with us, okay? And your culture, your community, your family, all these things influence how we see the world and how we process stimuli. Over to the left, you'll see that there's pictures of Officer Darren Wilson and Michael Brown. Unless you've been hiding under a rock, I think we're all familiar with what transpired in Ferguson last year. If you weren't, Darren Wilson was a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, that shot Michael Brown, an unarmed black man. And that sparked outrage and protest all around the country, but they were centralized in the community in which it happened, which was Ferguson, Missouri. One thing that you really want to pay attention to is how we organize and process things that go on. One thing that I encourage my students to do is to think about context, right? So when you're thinking about context, you have people who have different opinions on things. And when it comes to communication, understanding culture and perspective, backgrounds to where people are coming from. On both sides. On people who agree on the issue of what a police officer has to do, or people who believe that he used force rather excessively. In your lecture this week, there is a discussion. I'm sorry, not in your lecture. In your discussion post, there's a video I want you to watch about how we view authority, and selective exposure and selective attention is going to come to mind. So make sure you read the directions on the discussion, and also make sure you watch the video, because I hope it really pulls out some of these points that a lot of time we have preconceived notions, and we don't do a lot of perception checking to see if we're really seeing things from every single angle and not just our own. So that's the last point, is analyzing how you organize and interpret stimuli and consider other perceptions. If you look at the lower left-hand corner, there's the LA immigration rally. And so if you've been around listening to the news, more than likely you've seen the presidential campaign of Donald Trump, right? And he's used a lot of divisive language to carve out his political position, especially on immigration. And so comes a debate on two things: is America a land of laws, or is America a land of immigrants? And where you side on that issue isn't just simply right or wrong. Where you land on that issue really depends on your perception, and to what extent your community, your culture, and your background influences where you're at on a position. A lot of times we tend to think that we land on a side of position because we are inherently right and there's inherent wrong. But what I want you guys to do is be able to take a step back, okay, and put together, okay, how is my family, my culture, my community, my friends, how does that influence me on how I process stimuli? How does it influence my perception of what I think is right? And what you should do, what I want to encourage you to do, is to not just default to a position because that's what people in your culture are saying. That's what people in your community are saying. That's what your friends on the golf course say, or that's what people at the barbershop say. But what I want to encourage you guys to do is to use perception checking to find alternative voices that can check where you're coming from, and to look at what extent your culture, your community, your friends, your family is influencing your perception. Okay, that's a lot of people don't do that, but I really want to encourage you guys to take a step back and to do things like that. I think it's very helpful. So when it comes to looking at things and analyzing your perception and being able to communicate competently, one of the things that we develop is communication apprehension, which is the fear associated with real or anticipated communication with another person. And the book lists some key steps to address that. And the key steps is to prepare. So anytime you're engaging with somebody, sharing your perspective or listening to their perspective, you always want to prepare. Be prepared communicators. Also relax, rethink, and revision. And the last thing, which is the most important thing, and we're going to get into that as we go on later on the semester and talk more about public speaking, is also the practice. I think being a prepared, relaxed, and rehearsed speaker is great in face-to-face interaction, talking about different issues, talking about your own perception, and also public speaking. So I think it's good for now, and it's going to be good especially as we continue on this semester. So that kind of rounds out the chapter. There's some quick tidbits. It's not the sum of the chapters. You still want to do your reading, but hopefully that helps cast a little light on some of the key concepts in this chapter. All right. Hope that worked out for you, and have a great weekend. Take care.